Tēnā koutou katoa, and welcome to this workshop, the first of 5 that we're running on media reform. We'll open the session with karakia. Tikina atu rā te pūtake o ngā kōrero, I runga I te rangi Māori, kia ngākau te kaha, kia mau ki te honga tangata, ka whakamaua kia tina, koie, tai kia. But I'm Cara Palmer-Alcorn, and I'm the manager of the Media and Screen Policy team here at Manatū Taonga, and I'm supported today by the wider team, some of whom you'll meet in breakout sessions. Unfortunately, we do not have sign language interpreters today. However, we'll look to add sign language translation onto the presentation before we publish it, and you can turn on captioning. There is instructions on how to do this in the Q&A tab along the top of the presentation screen. The presentation today will be recorded. This is to ensure that people who are unable to attend can still have access to the same information to support their engagement and feedback with the proposals. However, the group discussions and feedback sessions that will join shortly won't be recorded. We take people's privacy seriously and will make sure the collection, retention, and access of personal information is done responsibly and respectfully. All personal information that is shared in our sessions is held in accordance with the Privacy Act, the Official Information Act, and the Public Records Act. And you can find more information about these on our website at mch.govt.nz/privacy. First, I just want to thank you for taking the time to join today's workshop. We really appreciate it. This is part of the Media Reform public consultation process. Media reform includes 5 proposals that aim to create a modern media legislation for New Zealand's media and content production sector. The proposal we'll be discussing today is about increasing investment into and discoverability of local content. And I would like to stress at this point that the proposal is highly ruled and the government has not decided whether to progress it. The purpose of this consultation is to hear your feedback on all the proposals and how we could change or improve them to support the best outcomes for the sector and for audiences. Any proposals that are ultimately agreed by Cabinet would require legislation to implement, and they would come into force in 2026 at the earliest. Today, I'm going to give a brief presentation on the proposal, and then we'll break into groups for discussion. We'll come back together at the end so that you can share some of the key insights from those discussions. There are lots of you here, which is great, and to make the most of the time, we'll just get into the presentation and leave space for introductions within the breakout sessions. So firstly, I'll provide a bit of context for this proposal. In the last decade, as you all know, there have been lots of changes in the way that we consume media content. Traditionally, our TV broadcasters have been the main providers of local screen content. They still are on their linear channels and apps, but audiences now have lots more choice around where, how, and what they watch. While this is great for us as consumers, the popularity of global streaming platforms like Netflix and Disney has contributed to the financial challenges facing local broadcasters and their platforms. With less revenue coming in, there is less to spend on local content. And while global streaming platforms are creating international productions in New Zealand, they don't generally commission local content. And that limited local content that is on these platforms can be hard to find. It can be poorly identified or buried amidst international content. The factors that I've just run through create a bit of a two-pronged problem. The first is that there is less investment from broadcasters, which means less local content being made. This has direct consequences for our domestic screen workforce and their work and income stability, professional development, and ultimately career viability in New Zealand. These impacts also create a risk for our ability to continue attracting and servicing the large international productions that help maintain the wider screen sector ecosystem here. The second problem is that New Zealand audiences ultimately end up seeing less local content, as it's either not available or hard to find on popular platforms. This is particularly the case for young New Zealanders. This jeopardizes the cultural and societal benefits of engaging with our own stories, places, voices, and faces on screen. So what are other countries doing? A number of other countries have had minimum local content requirements for TV broadcasters for some time. In response to the same problems that we've identified, many countries are now placing requirements on streaming platforms to create or show local content. Some of the measures that are being used overseas include reporting requirements. For example, Australia has voluntary requirements for global streamers to report on expenditure and availability of local content on their platforms. Minimum content obligations, where providers must carry a certain portion of local content. Investment obligations, for example, the Netherlands requires content providers to invest 5% of their annual revenue in local content, and Italy requires 16% of that revenue to be invested. Levies are also used, which require content providers to pay a proportion of revenue into a fund for local content production. For example, in Canada, they require a 5% contribution from streaming platforms, which is distributed across several funds to support Canadian content. And finally, discoverability and prominence requirements, where content providers must promote and display local content. Some examples of this are requirements to show local content on home screens, recommending local content to viewers, or promoting local content on banners within apps. Some countries also specify that a portion of the investment must be spent on certain types of content, for instance, particular genres, independent productions, or content in local and Indigenous languages. What are the aims? There are two aims of the proposal that we're discussing today. First is to support increases in the volume of and engagement with local content on global streaming platforms. And second, to support the local production sector's sustainability via increased investment. These aims complement the overall objectives across the media reform package of proposals that we're consulting on. The proposal we're discussing today is that all professional audiovisual media providers would have obligations to invest a portion of annual revenue in the creation or acquisition of local content, and requirements to put in place measures to clearly display local content and enable users to find new local content on platforms. Further work is needed to determine the exact definitions and requirements here, and we are really interested in your feedback around those definitions and wider aspects of the proposal. We have set out the intent behind some of the concepts in the consultation material to help inform your feedback. The intention is that the definition of local content, for example, will capture content that reflects New Zealand stories, places, voices, and faces. Factors that could be relevant include if the subject is the content is New Zealand or New Zealanders, if New Zealanders hold key roles in production, or if it is filmed in New Zealand. Our intent is that professional audiovisual media providers would include New Zealand TV broadcasters and streaming platforms, as well as global streaming platforms. This proposal is focused on platforms that have exclusive control over the content that they make available, so wouldn't cover those that host user-generated content, such as YouTube. We would also expect the proposed obligation to invest or investment obligations be set at a level where New Zealand broadcasters would meet them on current investment levels. But depending on the discoverability requirements, some broadcasters may have to take some actions to comply. Applying the proposal to local media providers, as well as global streamers, recognises New Zealand's international trade obligations. Essentially, these require us to treat international content providers and creators no less favourably than domestic content providers. We know there's been a lot of support behind the option of levy, which we have considered and is outlined in the relevant regulatory impact statement. Our initial analysis supported introducing investment obligations at this stage, as well as leading to greater sector investment in local content production. This option would also increase local content on streaming platforms. So that was the sort of brief overview, and now we're going to go into the breakout rooms where you can have a discussion about the proposal with others on the chat. We'd really like to hear your views on the potential impacts of the proposals and what you think needs to be top of mind if the government decides to move forward into detailed design. Everyone has been pre-assigned to a group, and we're still getting the hang of the tech, so hopefully this is seamless and you should be moved automatically. But please use the Q&A function at the top. If you haven't landed in the group, one of the team will sort that as quickly as possible. Enjoy the discussions, and I'll see you back here later.